success?
It's not about blaming Biden for the crisis. We can talk about that. It's about being a leader. Strong leaders make bad decisions. Every good leader will make a bad decision, maybe a series of them, but they lead through it. And when, as a leader, President Biden cowers and he blames Afghans and he blames Trump and he blames his own generals, he says, the buck stops with me. I took the consensus decision. You know how you kind of pivot right out of that. You don't look like a strong leader. You yell your way into a victory speech. You just don't show the American people that you truly understand the gravity that is felt in this house that we call America. It's not just the fact that we pulled out of Afghanistan. It's not just the fact that we have a 20-year war that we get to claim failure on. It's the posture. You have a Marine general sit there and say the Taliban were our partners. You have the entire administration saying one thing and almost doing another. And you've got about 22 million veterans that sit back and look at that and go, wow, were we betrayed? What happened here? You have to understand the tone and tenor of the men and women that fought this war in order to end it, and he doesn't.
Okay, so the question becomes now the formulation of the president's legacy. The historical events are basically concluded. There's debated 100 to 250, maybe up to 1,000 Americans left in Afghanistan. Some are choosing to be there, probably humanitarian people, etc. But the question becomes now the formation of Biden's legacy. And when you're studying history, right, that's always an important issue. And people will make it an issue into the next political election. And the Republicans obviously will try to make this a fiasco, and then use that as capital to undermine Biden's capacity to lead. History will come in and judge Biden in relationship to this and the loss of American lives. So we have these 13 Americans that died by a car bombing that occurred. And so that becomes the negative, and the other negative is, what did we do? What did we do? So we have an alternative approach. There were two approaches that were available. One approach was to completely evacuate from Afghanistan. And the other approach was to stay as we were, which was to have about 2,500 soldiers, maintain the air base in Afghanistan, and maintain a little hub there where we could watch over what was going on. And the argument was made that our drone technology and our satellite technology was sufficient to be able to see any incursion that the Taliban would make outside of their own boundaries. So, we're going to have a refugee crisis, et cetera, et cetera. But the question becomes the president's legacy. Now, time has made this a little bit different than it has in the past in terms of modern technology. The speed in which we have knowledge accumulating, the speed in which the media has already, we're a week out, and the media is already defining his legacy on the counter side. And now this is Fox News, so it's got a little bit of a negative side to it concerning the president. But now we ask the question, and we need to, right? We need to ask the question: did the president show those leadership skills that you need for a commander-in-chief? And I personally, I'm going to say no, he didn't. And the issue that's being brought up here by the Republican side, I don't know if it's exactly Republican. I think it's a historical question. Is did the commander-in-chief take responsibility as commander-in-chief? And the points being brought up here is, hey, he said, this was out of a consensus. The commander-in-chief does not lead out of consensus. And this is important to understand. We'll get more into this in the civics. But what happens is you have a joint chief of staff that sits over the joint chief of staff that sits over the entire military apparatus, and there's a secretary of a particular area of the armed services. There's 5 different armed services, and there's a secretary that sits over each one of them. That secretary is a civil person, it's not a military person. They may have military background. And then you have the generals that are under each of these. And you can get up to a 5-star general, which is only done in the state of major war. But usually it's up to a 4-star general. And those generals may be brought in to advise. But that's the situation. And what's happened now is that we're going to go into a technological phase of watching over Afghanistan and bringing in, if we need to bring anything in, they'll come from aircraft carriers in the Arabian Gulf. And this is causing the Navy a certain amount of stress because the Navy is now going to have to expand its role into the Arabian Gulf, which it hasn't done before. It hasn't put an aircraft in there on a permanent basis. But the idea is we're going to have an aircraft carrier that can immediately drop into Afghanistan if there are any problems that happen and take care of it from the air. And so there's a whole military issue. We have to understand how, now air cover and then, space cover, space command. Things are changing rapidly, as we speak. Yeah, things are changing in terms of the technology, hypersonic missiles and drones and stuff. So it gets back as a historical issue. It gets back to the question of the leadership of the commander-in-chief and what produces good leadership. And the opposition party, if you will, and that's not a term we use in American civics, but the opposition party, the Republican Party, the position that's being taken is maybe you made some mistakes. We all make mistakes, but you take responsibility for your mistakes. And you say, I am the person responsible. I am the commander-in-chief. Those 13 lives are on me. Okay. Now, what happens when a leader does that? Well, you go, of course you make mistakes. Okay. And I can give you a couple of examples historically, and we'll go over that at another time, of where leaders have come in and there's been a mistake, but they've taken responsibility for it. And then the people are very, very given to forgive the leader in their heart. But when somebody comes in and kind of pretends that they're not responsible, the commander-in-chief by definition is responsible. And it's important to understand that dynamic historically, and he'll be judged. So his legacy is judged oftentimes by his conduct in the military situation. I think the most poignant historical example of this would be Harry S. Truman in dropping the bomb on Nagasaki. And I didn't say Hiroshima, but Nagasaki. Really interesting, detailed question there. Was that necessary? Hiroshima, I don't think can be debated. Nagasaki is an interesting question. Did there need to be a second bomb dropped? And and that question is not one you're going to find in any textbook, right? People have not asked that question. We're going to ask that question as we get into the modern era